In the 17 years since Netflix started streaming to today, only 2 companies out of the hundreds of streaming services have managed to become measurably profitable at all. And those 2 are Hulu and Netflix. Now, Hulu claims to be profitable. I believe them, but I couldn't get any solid figures on that. Netflix, meanwhile, reported a profit of nearly $5.4 billion in 2023. And Netflix is really interesting to me because they're beating these mass media companies at distribution, keeping customers around, and most importantly, profitability. See, even when it seems like everyone has Netflix, like everyone I know has Netflix, everybody you know has Netflix. In Q1 of 2024, they added 9.5 million subscribers. Well, how are they beating the competition? The competition which has more money, more tools, more content at their disposal. Well, we're going to get into that today. This is the 15-minute marketing podcast presented by Solvis Media. They started as a DVD by mail rental company in 1997. And they started streaming exactly 10 years later in 2007. Then 10 years later in 2017, they did something in their marketing and product development that completely differentiated themselves from the pack, which is what I'm really excited to be talking about today. But for some important context. So broadband internet was becoming faster and streaming was becoming possible. So Reed Hastings, their CEO at the time, said, we knew that the DVD rental business had a limited lifespan. Streaming was a way to future-proof Netflix and stay ahead of competitors who were still focused on physical media. So Netflix began experimenting with streaming as early as 2007. Neil Hunt, who was the chief product officer at the time, said, we started small with streaming, but we quickly realized the potential. Our data showed us that once people started streaming, they watched more and explored more content than they did with DVDs. And so that was part of the reason for the switch entirely to streaming, which was in 2010, about 3 years after they started rolling streaming out. And then just 3 years after that, they spent $100 million on producing one season of House of Cards, which was their first piece of original content. For House of Cards, they actually took user profiles and they made different trailers depending on what the user profile's preferences were. For example, they would cut a trailer to feature more female characters and then market that to profiles who preferred seeing strong female characters, which is awesome. So right now we're in 2013. House of Cards becomes wildly successful, but I'm going to fast forward because Netflix had this really insane jump start when it came to being first to market. By 2020, everybody was launching streaming services. It felt like one service a week was launching only like a few years ago. And, you know, as time went on, it was like, it went from like people celebrating this to kind of a collective groan. And this is why I decided to do this episode, was because they're going against these like 100-year-old companies that have been doing distribution since the dawn of film even being a thing, which is awesome. So skipping forward to 2017, facing more competition now, what do? Well, as we've found in these episodes, great marketing is always preceded by the redevelopment or creation of a phenomenal product. And this is really what sparked this episode. I had watched the roast of Tom Brady, and I immediately remembered the campaign they did in 2017, which is still going on today. This was called the Netflix is a Joke campaign. It's my firm belief that this Netflix is a joke campaign was not only genius, just from like a shock jock type of ad campaign at first, but also the product itself was so smart just from a video producer's angle, and I'm going to get into that. And so Netflix is a Joke essentially was this really heavy focus on comedy as one of their real niche genres. I don't know. I saw somebody arguing about how to pronounce that online. I'll do both pronunciations. Niche or niche. I don't know. But and so I kind of asked myself, well, why comedy? When I was really starting to get into this, and I was like, why did Netflix focus so much? Because they have their own Instagram account just for Netflix is a Joke, which is just for comedy. They've really focused and spent a lot of money on comedy. So I was asking myself, well, Why is this? And, first of all, as we learn, they focus heavily on data. So they analyze viewing patterns on Netflix and audience engagement. And they had identified like this really, really high demand for comedy specials. So then they focused heavy on comedy more than any other service. And so this goes back to their roots. A lot of what they do is influenced by data. So Ted Sarandos, who at the time was the chief content officer, now he's the CEO, said, our data showed a strong and growing appetite for stand-up comedy. This insight drove our decision to invest heavily in comedy specials and secure deals with some of the biggest names in the industry. And then he said, data is at the heart of everything we do at Netflix. It helps us understand our audience's tastes and preferences, allowing us to make better decisions about the content we create and acquire. Netflix paid pretty much top dollar for comedians like Chris Rock, Dave Chappelle, Jerry Seinfeld, paid about like $10 to $20 million for these comedians to put their specials on Netflix. But now, what's interesting about the production side of things, and this is kind of the video production side of things, just briefly, Netflix just pretty much does, from time to time, they'll do exclusive deals with comedians. But pretty much what they do now, and this is pretty genius, is they'll just license a comedy special. The comedian will self-produce. They'll spend about $100,000 to $300,000, which in comparison to, the $10 million for an episode of Bridgerton or $100 million for a season of House of Cards is pretty cheap. And then Netflix will license it for anywhere from around $200,000 to about $1 million for 2 to 3 years. What's great about that for the comedian as well as Netflix is the comedian gets to own their special. So after that 2 years is up, they can put it on YouTube. They can sell it on their website. They get to own their content, which is huge for the artist. And then in terms of Netflix, they get an hour of fresh content for really cheap. And so that's pretty genius right there. It's a really smart play. So now the marketing angle, because this is the 15-minute marketing podcast, not the 15-minute product development podcast. And I actually might go a little bit over on this one. I'm sorry. But the reason I really wanted to get into this was whenever I do these deep dives, I always find something even more interesting than just the marketing. Like rarely do you find these campaigns. It's like, oh, it's just a campaign. It's almost always a genius idea or some innovative product or some sort of other development in the company that leads to the success of a great marketing campaign. In Netflix's case, the customer gave them the great data. And so then they use this to invest in comedic content and then to market to this base of comedy fans. And now they did a great job marketing this because I remember when this came out and I was like, wait, what? Like who's dissing Netflix? And then it turns out Netflix was dissing Netflix. And I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. So the chief marketing officer said, this is Kelly Bennett, who's the former chief marketing officer, quote, the goal was to create a campaign that was both surprising and memorable. And Netflix as a joke started off as a bit of a head scratcher, but it quickly became synonymous with our commitment to comedy. And so they started with these very cryptic billboards that like popped up everywhere saying Netflix is a joke. And the agency that did them, Battery, said this, our campaign launched with the stark black and white billboards with 4 simple words. Netflix is a joke. These boards were strategically placed near industry press and influencers in LA and New York. Media and social chatter began speculating whether these boards were a prank or a competitor's smear campaign. So what started with 4 words on billboard almost 4 years ago continues to serve as a platform for all things comedy at Netflix today. I'm reading this Variety article that I found from when it first started, September 5th, 2017. And it said that the signage is part of a new marketing campaign from the streaming service Variety has learned, though to what end is unclear. Netflix representatives declined to comment on the billboards on Tuesday. Social media users in New York and Los Angeles posted photographs on Tuesday of the billboards, which appeared that morning. They were also spotted in Hell's Kitchen neighborhood in New York, over the Arco gas station at Olympic and Robertson in LA, and in other locations. And then they have like this tweet right here that says, "Hey, anyone know what's up with these at Netflix is a joke ads up in Hell's Kitchen in New York City?" Oh man. And so they that was a Variety article back then. Comedy has this very wide audience, right? It's a very diverse range of demographics, and it really all depends on the comedian too. So like you could think of like the fans of Amy Schumer versus the fans of Bill Burr. Like they're completely different demographics. Although I'm sure some people love both comedians. But comedy's great for this kind of cross promotion stuff. They have these wide, already captivated audiences, people who are willing to spend a bit to access their content, like Patreon, shows, merchandise, that type of stuff. And Netflix does too. So that could cheapen the licensing fees for smaller to mid-range comedians, because they're bringing the massive Netflix subscriber base to their comedy. And these smaller to mid-range comedians are bringing their fans to the Netflix platform. There's a lot of cross-pollination there, with the middle-of-the-road comedians helping them gain audience. So influencer marketing is key. Then they now do this Netflix is a Joke Festival, which is a huge event. They call it the biggest comedy event in history, with an asterisk saying probably. But they have like multiple days of like the best comedians in the world coming to the festival, headlining. They had like 300 live events across 35 venues in LA. So they had like 300 separate little tiny events. So like 300 comedians, 35 venues, had places at venues like the Greek, the Dolby, the Forum, all of these like really well-known theaters throughout all of Los Angeles. So it's really cool what they've been able to do. That it's like essentially like a music festival, but for comedy. Then they've created a separate Instagram account, which now has 2.5 million followers. Everything comedy related is being put there, which is a really smart play, because it's really difficult as a generalist account in a time of specialists on social media. So they made a separate account there, post comedy clips every single day, reels, stuff like that, which all these things are really great. And I truly believe like stuff like this is why they're one of the only profitable streaming giants. And so this was a smash hit. They Q1 of the year following the campaign, Netflix's revenue surged by 14.8%. Year over year to 9.3 billion, with net income rising 77% to 2.3 billion. So obviously a resounding success. They're able to have fresh content like every month, because comedians are just putting out specials left and right, and they're gaining audiences, they're gaining traction there, which is just awesome. So how do we apply this? Well, last week I said to be bold, which isn't that super general. We're not all Netflix. We don't have massive global reach or like hundreds of millions to spend on high profile endorsements, but I do think we can take something away from this. So I have 5 key things to apply right here. So one is listen to your customers. I think I feel like we always find ourselves coming back to this one. With Subaru, it was more intuition, and then Domino's, it was just literal feedback, like this pizza sucks, it tastes like cardboard. And so that's a pretty easy way of fueling a comeback campaign. And now with Netflix, they used customer data, and they kind of did this in quiet for a while. That influenced their decision making with the product. Takeaway 1, listen to your customers. Takeaway 2, make sure your social media channels are focused. And this is huge, and something personally I need to work on a little bit more. Work on creating more focused pages or content on your pages. If you need any inspiration, just look at the Netflix page versus the Netflix is a Joke page on Instagram. It's okay to have multiple accounts in order to have more focused feeds. If you have different demographics and different target audiences within your own company, it's a smart play. 3, look for cross-pollination opportunities. Local influencers, podcast marketing, you could lower the cost of advertising there if you're helping both parties out. If like you're doing a an ad and your ad is on a podcast that's not necessarily relevant to what your business does, it's probably just going to cost you a normal flat rate. But if you have opportunity for some level of cross-pollination between, let's say, a podcast that's a little bit more relevant to your genre, and then you could kind of a little bit more relevant to your business, and then maybe you could help them out in certain ways, instead of it just being like a transactional thing, you could also see now like comedians really gravitate towards Netflix because they've treated them well and helped them grow their audience. So looking for cross-pollination opportunities in marketing is huge. 4, slogans can do a lot. My slogan isn't nearly as punchy as Netflix's, but it does intrigue more than what I could have gone with, which is like my slogan is all roads lead to video. I could have done like high performing video for high performing brands or something simple like that, but all roads lead to video. Well, people start to ask, well, what does that mean? And I just say, it's hard to make an emotional connection today in the digital world, because it's like next to impossible to effectively communicate our values and who we are clearly or, authentically to customers through just text or even photos. And video doesn't just make it easier to communicate these things, but it's night and day difference. It's completely different. It has a double meaning. All roads lead to video. All roads over the years, in terms of like creating the best ways of telling a story, they've kind of led to film and video. And then in today's space, the digital space, connecting with customers, all roads lead to video. So whether it be YouTube, your website, social media, any channel, they're all optimizing for video. Even LinkedIn, even Spotify, which is an audio platform, but now you could use video on there as well. So all roads lead to video is my slogan, which definitely creates some intrigue, and that's how that conversation kind of sparks from there. So that's 4, slogans do a lot. And then 5, in terms of events, Netflix as a joke fest is great. Events are huge. You want to find something that's relevant to your company, create an event around it. You could get a lot of buzz going on, and it's an excellent opportunity to get content as well. I'm going to blend this with the outro as well, but one day I'd love to make some sort of success summit with top CMOs and marketing professionals in attendance, which is one of the reasons why I'm trying to grow out this community a bit. If you've come from LinkedIn or Instagram or YouTube, I'm trying to make this a place for marketing and quick, digestible format, and I try and make it in under a 15-minute commute, but this episode might be more like 20. But if you got something out of this episode and you feel like someone else would benefit from learning a little bit about what Netflix did, I'd love it if you could share it with someone you think would get a lot out of it. Otherwise, this is Liam Bennett. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week.